The Illusion of Choice by Richard Shotton. The Illusion of Choice by Richard Shotton delves into the fascinating world of behavioral science, revealing how subtle psychological biases profoundly influence our decisions. The book challenges the notion of purely rational choice, demonstrating that our preferences and actions are often shaped by unconscious nudges and environmental cues. It provides marketers, business leaders, and individuals with practical, evidence-based strategies to understand and leverage these insights, ultimately helping them make better choices and influence behavior more effectively. Now, let's go through some pairs of questions and answers to understand the core ideas of the book. First, why does the first piece of information often disproportionately influence our subsequent judgments? Our minds tend to anchor onto initial data, making it a powerful reference point for evaluating later information, even if irrelevant. Anchoring effect shows how an initial piece of information, even an arbitrary one like a high price, can set a benchmark for all subsequent evaluations. For instance, if a product is initially priced high and then discounted, the perceived value of the discount is greater because the original high price serves as an anchor, making the current price seem more attractive. This bias is pervasive, affecting everything from salary negotiations to purchasing decisions. Second, why are we so influenced by what others do? We are inherently social creatures, and observing the actions of others provides a powerful shortcut for making decisions, especially in uncertain situations, leading us to conform. Social proof is the psychological phenomenon where people assume the actions of others in an attempt to reflect correct behavior for a given situation. This is why testimonials, reviews, and popularity indicators are so effective. If many people are doing something, we assume it's the right or good thing to do. For example, a restaurant that appears busy is often perceived as better quality than an empty one. Third, why does perceived limited availability make things more desirable? The idea that something is scarce triggers a sense of urgency and fear of missing out, making us value it more and act faster to acquire it before it's gone. The scarcity principle suggests that opportunities seem more valuable to us when their availability is limited. This can be real scarcity, example, limited edition products, or artificial, example, only 3 left in stock. The perceived threat of losing the opportunity heightens its desirability, pushing consumers to make quicker purchasing decisions. This bias leverages our aversion to loss. Fourth, why do we feel compelled to return favors? The principle of reciprocity dictates that we feel obligated to give back to those who have given to us, creating a powerful social bond and influencing future interactions. Reciprocity is a fundamental social norm where if someone does something for us, we feel a psychological debt to repay them. This can be as simple as a free sample at a store leading to a purchase, or a small gift prompting a larger donation. The feeling of obligation can be very strong, even if the initial favor was unsolicited or unwanted, making it a potent tool for influence. Fifth, why does losing something feel worse than gaining the equivalent? Humans are wired for loss aversion. The psychological impact of a loss is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure derived from an equivalent gain, driving us to avoid risks. Loss aversion is a core concept in behavioral economics, explaining why people are more motivated to avoid a loss than to achieve an equivalent gain. For instance, people are more likely to take steps to avoid a 10-pound fine than they are to take equivalent steps to gain a 10-pound bonus. This bias influences everything from investment decisions to how products are framed. Don't miss out versus gain this benefit. Sixth, why does how information is presented drastically affect our choices? Framing effects demonstrate that the way options or information are worded, even if objectively identical, can significantly alter our perception and subsequent decision-making. Framing refers to the way information is presented to us, which can influence our interpretation and decision. For example, a medical treatment described as having a 90% success rate is perceived more favorably than one with a 10% failure rate, despite conveying the same objective information. Businesses use framing extensively to highlight benefits or mitigate perceived risks, guiding consumer choices towards desired outcomes. Seventh, why do we strive to remain consistent with our past actions or statements? Once we make a commitment, even a small one, we feel an internal and external pressure to behave consistently with that commitment, influencing future choices. The principle of commitment and consistency states that once we've made a choice or taken a stand, we will encounter personal and interpersonal pressures to behave consistently with that commitment. This is why foot-in-the-door techniques work. Getting someone to agree to a small request makes them more likely to agree to a larger, related request later. This bias helps us maintain a coherent self-image and simplifies decision-making. Eighth, why do we tend to obey authority figures, even if their directives are questionable? We are socialized to respect and defer to authority, often assuming their expertise and legitimacy, which can override our own judgment. The authority principle highlights our deep-seated tendency to comply with requests from perceived authority figures. This compliance often stems from a belief in their superior knowledge or legitimate power, and it can be triggered by symbols like titles, uniforms, or even expensive clothing. The famous Milgram experiment showcased the extreme extent to which people would obey an authority figure, even when it conflicted with their moral compass. Ninth, why do we prefer things that are easy to process and understand? Our brains naturally favor cognitive ease, meaning we prefer information and tasks that require less mental effort, leading us to often choose simplicity over complexity. Cognitive ease refers to the feeling of fluency or familiarity when processing information. Things that are easy to read, understand, or recall are perceived as more truthful, credible, and even more pleasant. This bias explains why simple, clear messages often outperform complex ones, and why familiar brands are often preferred. It's a shortcut our brain uses to conserve energy, but it can lead to overlooking important details. 10th, why can too many options be detrimental? While we desire choice, an excessive number of options can lead to decision paralysis, reduced satisfaction, and even regret, as the mental effort required becomes overwhelming. The paradox of choice, or choice overload, suggests that while people want options, having too many can be counterproductive. When faced with an overwhelming array of choices, individuals may delay decisions, make suboptimal choices, or feel less satisfied with their final selection due to the perceived missed opportunities of the unchosen alternatives. For example, a jam study showed that fewer sales occurred when 24 types of jam were available, compared to only 6. 11th, why do subtle cues influence our subsequent thoughts and actions? Priming is a phenomenon where exposure to one stimulus influences a response to a subsequent stimulus, often unconsciously, shaping our perceptions and behavior. Priming demonstrates how seemingly unrelated information can subtly prepare our minds for certain responses. For example, being exposed to words related to elderly might cause someone to walk more slowly. In marketing, priming can involve using specific colors, sounds, or words to evoke certain feelings or associations before a product is presented, influencing consumer attitudes and purchasing intentions without conscious awareness. 12th, why are pre-selected options so powerful? Defaults leverage our natural inertia and desire for cognitive ease. People are far more likely to stick with the preset option than to actively make a change, even if it's not optimal. The power of defaults is immense because they capitalize on human inertia and the tendency to avoid effort. When an option is pre-selected, it becomes the path of least resistance. This is evident in organ donation rates, where countries with opt-out systems have significantly higher donor rates than those with opt-in systems. Companies use defaults for subscriptions, privacy settings, and product configurations, knowing most users won't bother to change them. 13th, why do we tend to like things more the more we're exposed to them? The mere exposure effect, or familiarity principle, states that repeated exposure to a stimulus, even without direct interaction, increases our positive feelings towards it. The mere exposure effect explains why familiarity breeds liking, not contempt. The more we encounter something, a song, a brand logo, a face, the more comfortable and positive our feelings towards it become, even if we don't consciously recall the previous exposures. This bias is fundamental to advertising, where repeated brand impressions build trust and preference over time, making a brand seem more reliable and appealing simply by virtue of its ubiquity. 14th, why do we seek information that confirms our existing beliefs? Confirmation bias is our tendency to interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses, often ignoring contradictory evidence. Confirmation bias is a pervasive cognitive bias that leads us to selectively seek out and interpret information that supports what we already believe, while dismissing information that challenges those beliefs. This can lead to echo chambers, reinforce stereotypes, and hinder objective decision-making. For example, someone who believes a particular product is superior will actively look for positive reviews and dismiss negative ones, solidifying their initial conviction. 15th, why does introducing an inferior third option make one of the original options more attractive? The decoy effect, or asymmetric dominance, makes a specific choice more appealing when a third, clearly inferior option is present, subtly shifting preferences. The decoy effect occurs when consumers change their preference between two options after a third, asymmetrically dominated option is introduced. For example, if you have a small popcorn for $3 and a large for $7, sales might be split. Introduce a medium popcorn for $6.50, the decoy, which is clearly worse value than the large, and suddenly the large popcorn seems like a much better deal, boosting its sales. This bias manipulates perceived value. 16th, why do things that stand out capture our attention and memory more easily? Salience refers to the quality of being particularly noticeable or important. Salient information is more likely to be processed, remembered, and influence our decisions. Salience dictates that elements that are novel, surprising, or emotionally resonant are more likely to grab our attention and be remembered. In marketing, this means that an advertisement that is visually striking, uses an unexpected sound, or tells a compelling story will cut through the clutter more effectively than a generic one. Our brains prioritize salient information because it often signals something important or potentially dangerous, aiding survival. 17th, why does physical interaction influence our perception of value? The quality of touch and physical interaction with an object can create subconscious associations that affect how we perceive its value, often leading to a haptic dissonance if poor. Shotton discusses how the physical feel of an item, e.g. the weight of a product, the texture of packaging, can subtly influence our perception of its quality and value. A heavy, well-constructed item often feels more premium than a light, flimsy one. If the tactile experience doesn't match our expectations, haptic dissonance, it can negatively impact our overall judgment of the product, even if its functional performance is identical. 18th, why do we need external help to stick to our goals? Commitment devices are pre-commitments or self-imposed rules designed to make it harder to deviate from a desired course of action, leveraging future consequences to overcome present temptations. Commitment devices are strategies people use to lock themselves into a desired behavior by increasing the costs of failing or decreasing the costs of succeeding. For instance, putting money into an account you can only access if you meet a fitness goal, or publicly declaring a resolution. These devices help bridge the gap between our long-term intentions and our short-term impulses, making it easier to overcome procrastination and achieve goals by changing the future incentive structure. 19th, why do we judge experiences based on their peak and end moments, not the average? The peak-end rule states that our memory of an experience is disproportionately influenced by its most intense, peak moment, and how it concluded, end, rather than the sum of all its parts. The peak-end rule is a cognitive bias that impacts how we remember and evaluate past experiences. We don't remember every moment of an event. Instead, our overall judgment is heavily weighted by the most emotionally intense point, the peak, positive or negative, and the final moments of the experience. This means that even a long, slightly unpleasant experience can be remembered positively if it has a strong positive ending, and vice versa. This is crucial for customer service and event planning. 20th, why does a positive impression in one area influence our overall perception? The halo effect is a cognitive bias where our overall impression of a person, company, or product in one area influences our feelings and thoughts about their character or other attributes. The halo effect explains why attractive people are often perceived as more intelligent, kind, and trustworthy, or why a positive experience with one product from a brand leads us to assume other products from that brand are also good. A single outstanding trait or achievement can cast a halo over all other perceived attributes, making us overlook flaws or assume positive qualities where none exist. This bias is particularly relevant in branding and personal branding. Action plan. Next steps. 1. Actively pay attention to your own decision-making processes throughout the day, trying to identify which behavioral biases might be at play. 2. Critically evaluate advertisements and sales pitches, looking for the specific psychological techniques, such as scarcity, social proof, framing, being used to influence you. 3. Apply 1 or 2 behavioral science principles in a small, controlled way in your personal or professional life, such as setting a default, using a commitment device, and observe the outcome. 4. Consciously counter confirmation bias by actively seeking out information and opinions that challenge your existing beliefs before making important decisions. 5. When presenting options or tasks to others, try to reduce complexity and highlight the most important choices to prevent choice overload and promote cognitive ease.
That's all for today's book. How do you think? Do you have any feedback or your own ideas popping up in your mind? Please feel free to let us know by leaving a comment in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to get updates on new book summaries from us. Thanks and have a good day.